The last time I saw my sister's real face, the one she hid behind all that practiced elegance and those perfectly timed smiles, I was standing in the rain outside a hospital in Lower Manhattan, watching her walk away like she was leaving a business meeting she found mildly inconvenient. And what I remember most isn't the anger, though God knows it was there, burning in my chest like swallowed glass, but the sound of her heels against the wet pavement, that sharp, confident click, 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 that said louder than any words that she had already won, that as far as she was concerned, I was already buried. 3 weeks earlier, my father had died, quietly, in the same hospital where I now stood frozen, watching his golden child disappear into the neon blur of a city that never stops moving, never stops consuming, never stops reminding you that you are utterly alone. And in the hollow space between his last breath and that moment in the rain, I had discovered that the inheritance he had promised me, the money that was supposed to fund the surgery my twin 5-year-olds desperately needed, surgery, that had already been postponed twice because I couldn't scrape together the final payment, had been systematically, elegantly, and completely stolen, not by some faceless corporate entity or some slick financial predator working the gray areas of the law, but by her, by my own sister, by the woman who had held my hand at our mother's funeral, who had sent birthday cards to the twins with $20 bills taped inside, who had looked me in the eye just 48 hours earlier and said, with what I now recognize as a performance of a lifetime, that she was praying for us, that she knew God would make a way. The money had been in a trust, a simple, clean arrangement our father had set up after our mother passed, specifically designating the bulk of his liquid assets for the medical care of his grandchildren, for my children, for the 2 little reasons I got out of bed every morning. And the bank, when I finally managed to get someone on the phone after a week of confusing automated messages and politely worded delays, informed me that the account had been closed, that the funds had been transferred, pursuant to a legal directive signed by me, by my own hand. And when I drove to the bank in person, when I sat in the branch manager's office with my hands shaking so badly I had to put them under my thighs, they showed me the signature, and God help me, it was good, it was really, really good. Someone had studied my handwriting, had practiced the loops and slants until they could have signed my name in their sleep, and I knew, with a certainty that had nothing to do with evidence, and everything to do with the particular way my sister had always been able to mirror me, to anticipate me, to slide inside my skin and wear it better than I ever could, that she had done this. She had found someone, paid someone, become someone who could unmake me with a piece of paper. The police, when I finally worked up the courage to call them, listened politely, took notes, and told me that financial crimes of this nature were complicated, that they would need time, that I should gather documentation, and I could hear in their voices what they weren't saying, which was that this was a family matter, that these cases were nearly impossible to prosecute, that I should probably just talk to my sister, work it out, keep it in the family. And I hung up the phone and sat in my 1-bedroom apartment in Queens, the apartment my father had helped me find, had co-signed for, had told me was a fresh start, and I listened to my twins breathing in the next room, those 2 small, fragile sounds that were the only things keeping me tethered to the earth, and I understood, in a way I had never understood anything before, that the systems we build to protect us, the laws and the banks and the police and even the bonds of blood, are just elaborate stage sets, beautiful and convincing until someone kicks them over and you see the bare concrete behind them. My sister lived in a high-rise in Manhattan, a glass and steel tower that pierced the sky like a declaration of war, and I had been there exactly once, for a party she threw after closing some deal, some acquisition, some piece of corporate cannibalism that had made her another few $1 million, and I had stood by her floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the city spread beneath us like a circuit board and felt, for the first time in my life, the full weight of the distance between us, not the physical distance of miles or neighborhoods, but the chasm that opens when one person decides that ambition is a virtue and another person decides that love is, and she had glided through that party like a shark through dark water, touching shoulders, kissing cheeks, whispering things that made people laugh and lean closer, and I had watched her and thought, with kind of dull wonder, that we had come from the same womb, had shared a bedroom for 10 years, had fought over the same toys, and the same attention and the same desperate need to be seen, and somehow she had emerged from that childhood with skin like armor, and I had emerged with skin like gauze. The surgery my children needed was not experimental, was not risky, was not some last-ditch Hail Mary from a desperate parent. It was routine, it was standard, It had a 97% success rate, and the only thing standing between them and that 97% was money, $200,000, which in the grand architecture of American medicine was a drop, a rounding error, the cost of a weekend in the Hamptons, or moderately nice piece of art. But to me it was everything. It was a wall I had been beating my head against for 6 months. It was a reason I had stopped sleeping, stopped eating, stopped being able to look at my children without feeling the hot sting of failure pressing behind my eyes. And when my father died, when he left that money specifically for them, for the grandchildren he had held in his arms and sung to sleep and promised, in his quiet, steady way, that he would always take care of, I had allowed myself, for one stupid, human moment, to feel relief, to feel that maybe, just maybe, the universe had finally decided to cut me a break. And then my sister took it. She reached into my father's grave and pulled that money out with her bare hands, and she left me standing in the rain outside a hospital with nothing but the sound of her heels and the knowledge that I had been outmaneuvered by the one person in the world who knew exactly where all my soft spots were. And that was the moment I knew. The Rayar revenge begins now. The first thing I did, after the rain stopped and the sun came up over Queens like it didn't know anything, like it hadn't just watched my life collapse into a pile of ash and ink, was buy a burner phone from a bodega on Roosevelt Avenue, a cheap, prepaid thing that looked like a toy, and I sat in my car, an aging Honda Civic with cracked dashboard and a check engine light that had been glowing so long it felt like a friend, and I called her. I called her because some part of me, some stupid, stubborn, hopeful part that had somehow survived everything else, still believed that this was a mistake, that if I could just hear her voice, just explain what the bank had told me, just remind her that my children, her nephews, were the ones who would suffer, she would say something, anything, that would make it make sense, that would reveal this whole nightmare as some elaborate misunderstanding, some clerical error, some cruel joke the universe was playing on me at her expense. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, and then it went to voicemail, her voice, smooth and professional and perfectly modulated, telling me she was unavailable but would return my call as soon as possible, and I hung up without leaving a message because what was I supposed to say? What words existed that could bridge the gap between what I thought we were and what we had apparently become? I called again, and again it went to voicemail, and again I hung up, and by the 10th call I had stopped expecting anything different, had stopped hoping she would pick up, had started to understand that this silence was not accidental, that it was a message, a signal, a declaration. And I kept calling anyway because there was something in the act itself, in the repetition, in the small rebellion of hitting redial over and over, that felt like doing something, felt like movement, felt like the only way I could prove to myself that I hadn't given up, that I was still fighting, even if the fight looked like this, like a man sitting in a parked car hitting redial on a burner phone while the sun crawled across the sky and his children waited for him at a neighbor's apartment, waiting for the surgery that wasn't going to happen, waiting for a father who was slowly, methodically losing his mind. I called him 4 to 7 times that day. 4 to 7 times I pressed that button. 4 to 7 times I listened to that phone ring into the void, and 4 to 7 times I heard her voice telling me she would call back, and 4 to 7 times I hung up without speaking. And by the end, by the time the sun was starting to set and my thumb was sore from pressing the same button over and over, I had memorized the cadence of her voicemail greeting, the way she paused between sentences, the little breath she took before saying her name, and I hated that I knew it, hated that she was so deeply embedded in me that even her absence, had become a kind of presence I couldn't escape. I was sitting there, in that car, with the dashboard light starting to glow in the growing dark, when the radio, which had been playing some soft rock station I wasn't really listening to, cut out for a news bulletin, and the announcer's voice, urgent and slightly breathless in that way that means something has actually happened, something real, something that isn't just another political squabble or celebrity scandal, cut through the static and said, with a kind of gravity that makes you lean forward without meaning to, that there had been an explosion in Doha, in Qatar, at a luxury hotel frequented by international business executives and diplomats, and that early reports indicated multiple casualties, though the exact number was still unclear. And I remember thinking, with a detachment that probably should have worried me, that this was just more noise, more tragedy, more evidence that the world was a burning building, and we were all just choosing which window to jump from. And then the announcer said the name of the hotel. And the name of the hotel was the name of the hotel where my sister stayed whenever she traveled to the Middle East for business. The hotel she had posted about on social media just 3 days earlier. The hotel whose rooftop bar she had photographed at sunset. The hotel where, if the universe had any sense of justice, any sense of balance, any sense of what I had lost and what I needed, she would be right now, sitting in that bar, sipping an overpriced cocktail and closing deals on her laptop while my children waited for a surgery that would never come. The thought entered my mind like a stranger walking into a room, unexpected and carrying something I couldn't quite identify, and I sat there in the dark, with a radio playing and a burner phone warm in my hand, and I let myself imagine it, just for a moment, just for a breath. I let myself imagine a world where that explosion had solved my problem, where the money, wherever it was, would somehow find its way back to me, where I wouldn't have to be the one to do anything, where justice, if you could call it that, had arrived on its own, swift and terrible and utterly without mercy. And then I shook my head, literally shook it, like I could rattle a thought loose, because she was my sister, because she was the mother of my memories, because even after everything, some part of me still loved her, or loved who I thought she was, or loved the idea that family meant something more than blood and betrayal. And I turned up the radio, listening for more details, more names, more confirmation that would either release me from this fantasy or lock me deeper into it. And then, 5 minutes after Bulletin ended, 5 minutes after the announcer had moved on to weather and sports and the ordinary business of reporting a world that kept spinning no matter what happened, my phone buzzed, the burner phone, the one only I had a number for, the one that had only ever been used to call my sister 4 to 7 times. And on the screen, in the sterile glow of a notification, was a message from my bank. And the message said, in the bland, impersonal language of institutions that don't care about your joy or your pain, that $200,000 had been deposited into my account, that the funds were available immediately, that I could access them through my mobile app or by visiting any branch. And I stared at that notification, stared at it until the screen dimmed and then went dark. And I thought about the 4 to 7 calls, and the explosion, and the money, and the timing. And I thought about how the universe doesn't work like this, how coincidences don't line up like this, how money doesn't appear out of nowhere 5 minutes after someone you hate might have died. And I knew, with a certainty that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with a particular coldness that was spreading through my chest, that this was not coincidence, this was not luck, this was not the universe finally cutting me a break. This was something else. Something I didn't yet understand. Something that connected my sister and the explosion and the money and the 4 to 7 unanswered calls into a single, terrifying equation I was going to have to solve whether I wanted to or not.